Welcome, everyone. My name is Anthony Luscre, Kilo 8 Zulu Tango, and tonight's topic is youth and amateur radio and amateur radio community displays and outreach. So we're going to talk about reaching out to a number of different groups. This session is going to be 2 weeks long. This will be part one tonight and part two next Wednesday night. It's going to be information and resources for clubs or individuals interested in working with youth and community organizations in amateur radio. This is my contact information, kzt@awrl.net, my website, kzt.com. The purpose of the presentation is to provide you and or your local radio club with ideas and resources to encourage, instruct, and mentor youth involvement in amateur radio. I'm going to be listing resources for youth, resources to share with school teachers, scouting, and other youth group leaders. And I can't cover everything tonight. We're also going to encourage instruction. We're also going to share resources for public displays of amateur radio. Those two slides got sort of mixed together. You're going to need the slideshow. We'll post it on RATPAC, but you can get access to the whole slideshow at tiny.cc/YIAR, Youth in Amateur Radio, or you can shoot the QR code and I'll show it at the end. There is not 115 slides. There's about 160 slides now in the slideshow presentation. All the opinions expressed are those of the presenter, not representing the sponsors of this session. And a number of the things I'm going to be sharing today were from other presentations or other magazine articles that I've done. Looking around at Hamfest or club meeting, you will get the definite and most likely accurate impression that the ham radio population as a whole is graying. This is a quote from Rich Molson a couple of years ago. First of all, let's define what I'm talking about with youth and amateur radio. I suggest focusing on a broad age group, anyone basically 26 years of age or younger. We're going to break that down into three main categories for our discussion purposes, and that's going to be students in grades 4 through 8, the primary and middle school ages, high school students, college students, and recent graduates. Those are going to be the groups that make up our under 26 years of age. Of course, the approaches and focus will differ for each of the different age groups. I also suggest focusing on public groups with intersecting interest. This includes not only youth, but any member of the community involved in emergency prep and or public safety, public service groups, parents of the youth amateur radio operators that you recruit, and retirement communities or other groups looking for new hobbies. So let's look at some of the things we want to focus on for different groups. Students in grades 4 through 8, really the big item here is exposure. Exposure. Things like classroom demos, something called Radio Day, which I'll be describing later in this presentation. Now, the first thing most of us think about is school clubs at this point in time. I'm going to tell you to put that on hold because a school club is not the be-all, end-all that you're really looking for in this particular age group. And we'll talk about some of the reasons for that later. You really want to stress integration with school subjects. And with STEM focus that's being done in a lot of schools, it makes it very easy to integrate amateur radio. But I really believe in integrating it with every area of the curriculum. And we'll talk about some of those areas that you can do. This really helps. This is one of the things that might get your foot in the door with a local school. When we start talking about high school and college students, one of the problems are if they've had no exposure to amateur radio before this point in time, it's hard to start that exposure process at this point because they have a lot of other things going on with them. So what we tend to do at this group is don't really focus on the whole group. Start looking specifically to recruit in specific majors and classes. There's some areas in high school and college where you'll find people that are more likely to be interested in amateur radio. That's not exclusive, but I think you're going to have more success. And in this particular age group, you're really competing against a lot of other things that are going on in their life. So being a little more focused at this age group is probably a good idea. Another thing we can start doing with these students is stressing how it's amateur radio can be a real benefit for future career paths, and especially with the opportunity to network with other hams who are in high-tech fields, and just to network with hams in general. Amateur radio, I often explain this to parents, is a unique opportunity for young people to be able to communicate on a one-to-one basis with adults, just like they are part of that group. Having that amateur radio license means that whether you're 9 years old and talking to an adult, you're still discussing things in a very similar fashion. It's not that difference in discussion that we get when we're talking about older and younger people. At the high school and college level, this is often a good point when you do find people that are interested to really jump on the licensing aspect, but that has to be followed by mentoring, and I'll be talking a lot more about that later. A really big thing with this group is once you get them with their license, give them operating opportunities. They might not have the equipment at home. They might not have the place to put up an antenna. So invite them to your station. Have them involved in activities like contesting, POTA, other things that your local group might do. This is very, very important if you want to create amateur radio future operators, or as opposed to just creating licensed youth. Licensed youth doesn't do us really any good unless they become active. This tiered youth programming, general information, public relations, this is something you can do. It's basically a reverse field trip. In other words, instead of the students going somewhere for a field trip, I go to the schools, or you can go to the schools and set up things and do demonstrations with radio technology. This works well for the 4th through 8th grade students, and I'll talk about that extensively in my radio day program. The other thing you can do is youth radio clubs. These could be part of a school, community organization, scouting, local club, sponsored, etc. These are youth who have self-identified that they're interested. They've been recruited through this whole process we're going to talk about, and they are licensed. They're working on their licensing. Youth on the air type of activities for licensed youth or youth working on their license. There's been a whole lot of good things going on at the national, international level with YOTA, Youth on the Air. Very recently, I was at K3LR station in West Middlesex, Pennsylvania, and they were hosting the 5 different youth operators for the Islands on the Air contest. I'm sorry, the IARU contest. And they were operating with a special call sign of W3Y for that activity. You can include youth in typical club-based licensing classes, but you probably are going to need to make a few changes in the way you do your licensing classes if you want to be able to make them available to youth. It's quite a bit easier if you're doing online classes or hybrid classes where you're doing it both in person and online, because first of all, the students you're going to be working with, they can't drive. So they're going to be at the mercy of being transported to your location, and that is often a gotcha. Also, there's some reluctance of some parents to just drop their child off at an activity with people they don't necessarily know. So by doing the classes online eliminates that whole possibility. You may need to make some adjustments in the reading materials, designing some slides and things that are much more able to be focused on by youth. Unfortunately, there's no really good license manual that's written at a youth appropriate level. It'd be nice if there was, but there is not. Now, when you start getting up into high school and college, it's a different story. There's no problem with the materials. So let's talk about historically how amateur radio has attracted youth into it. And I'm guessing that many of you will find one of these 4 pathways was your start into amateur radio, whether it was shortwave or broadcast, DXing, listening. You might have been involved in the scouting program. There might have been a school radio club at your school, or the most effective of all, but the one we have the least control of, and that's having a family member as a ham. This is probably the biggest way to guarantee youth involvement, is to have them have a family member who is a ham. But these four are historically the main ways that students have got into amateur radio. So let's dig a little bit deeper into each of these. And shortwave listening, unfortunately, there's been a drastic decrease in broadcasting worldwide. And the broadcasting that is still there is very specialized and not of general interest. One of the other problems is hams are now on single sideband, and most typical multi-band radios that a student might accidentally pick up that their parents own or that someone loans them probably only does AM coverage. So they're not going to be able to listen to amateurs on that particular radio. We'll talk more about a solution for that a little bit later. Scouting programs, unfortunately, there's been a drastic decrease in the number of troops and youth entering scouting. So that number is down considerably. School radio clubs are not as common now as they once were. But it's not just radio. After-school clubs in general have greatly declined. Many schools don't have time or money or facilities to be able to do after-school clubs. So it's not just amateur radio, it's other types of clubs also. Let's take a look back to 1962. This is a 6th grade class. And I've went through and identified the people who eventually became ham radio operators out of this group. And one of the things that's very interesting is you'll notice, just like any group of hams, they're not all interested in the same things. So we have one person who now long after that 1962, they're a retired programmer for Microsoft. Henry was an accountant. Paul works for Tesla Motors. Bob here is a professional engineer at Purdue University, a professor. And Roger here is a retired high school chemistry teacher now. And Sam back in the back, he not only took his amateur radio, but he also took it on the road and moved to Hawaii and set up Dude's Waikiki surf shop. So notice we had a large group, but not everyone became hams, but the people that did become hams, in many cases, it's influenced their career choices. Now, let me give you the bad news. This is all fictitious. I just made all this up. But this was what could happen if the kids are exposed. What was my exposure? Well, I was very interested in science and geography, especially maps. And I got interested in electronics and radio in junior high school. So it was a natural fit for me to be thinking about amateur radio, a way to explore all those countries that I viewed in the maps and heard about in geography, and to mix in my interest in electronics and radio. I convinced my parents to buy me a gift of a shortwave radio kit. This is a Gray Mark 5551. It's still sitting downstairs. Unfortunately, it's not functioning right now, but it was a regenerative 3-tube receiver. I converted the clothes closet in my bedroom to my listening shack. My bedroom was in the basement, so my first antenna was actually a wire stapled to the overhead floor joist, so it was a below-ground antenna, but it worked fine for shortwave broadcast. Eventually, I ran an ed-fed wire outside for greatly improved reception. As many of you that started out this route, you might have also got a WPE number. This was something that was issued by Popular Communications magazine. You could actually get a license number as a shortwave listener, and I submitted QSL requests to many different shortwave broadcasters. I was hooked on shortwave listening and broadcast band listening, DXing. I was involved in scouting, so I was interested in being able to operate portable two-way radio in the field. I saw this advertisement for the Power Mite, and I was stricken. I fell in love. Unfortunately, $59.95 was a fortune for a 1970s paperboy. $59.95 would have been about $389 in 2021 dollars, and that worked out to about half of my yearly income as a paperboy. So lots of interest, but no license. I didn't know a ham, so I had no idea how to study to get my license. I was intimidated by the Morse code requirement, and the cost of radio equipment was prohibitive. So there was no novice license listed for Anthony Luscre in New Middletown, Ohio. In 1970, the roadblocks that stopped me and many other people were I did not know what I needed to do to become a ham. I did not know anyone with the license to help me. The Morse code requirement seemed insurmountable, and the cost availability of equipment was difficult. What are some of the roadblocks in 2023? Well, they've changed a little bit. One of the things is ham radio has developed this reputation of a dead hobby or only for old white males. Most youth do not know a ham personally. There's a declining number of clubs and after-school groups in general, a decline in scouting, and lots of other activities available that do not require licensing. So what's happened now is quite a bit of the focus has been moved away from amateur radio. So not only do we need to be able to overcome these roadblocks, but we also have to do a better job with public relations and exposing youngsters to amateur radio. Some of the other roadblocks in 2023, no study guides written specifically for youth. Entry-level license does not include data and voice on HF, two of the most popular things with many new hams, except for on 10 meters. Previous pathways are drying up, shortwave listening, scouting, school groups, etc. What did I miss? Feel free to put some things in the chat if you have any ideas of things I missed. We'll get a chance to also do Q&A a little bit later, but if you can think of things that I missed, put them in the chat so you don't forget. So back to my own personal story. In the fall of 1980, after college and marriage and a career, my wife, Linda, saw an ad in the local paper for an amateur radio class. She said, "Isn't that the thing you were interested in when you were a teenager?" And I said, "Yes, it is." So she said, "Why don't you go to the class?" I said, "Why don't you come with me?" So we went together for a weekly Morse code class to be able to pass that 5-word-a-minute novice requirement. I passed my novice written test in the summer of 1981, passed my tech that fall, joined a local radio club, and became active. My first HF activity began in 1983, and the rest is history. I've been doing amateur radio very regularly since that, and I have over 115,000 QSOs on HF since that point in time. Let's talk about some myths of amateur radio and youth. The first myth is that you must have a school club. A school club can be a great way to go, but don't waste all your energy with the school club until you've already established a repertoire, a relationship with the school. You get interested students and you're moving forward. So don't start with a radio club. That's something to work towards. The next thing is licensing is everything. No, I'm going to say exposure is everything. Licensing will come to the students who are interested. Because that goes to our next myth. Unlike us, everyone given the opportunity to become a ham doesn't want to become a ham. We think that when I show someone all the great things we can do, they're immediately going to say, "That's for me, I want to do it." And you know just as well as I do that it will be a small percentage. If you get 5% of the kids interested, you're doing great. And that's more than the general population percentage of amateur radio. It's another myth is it's always love at first sight. No, I'm going to say that it's exposure first, exposure again, and exposure again over time, and then they might find that something they're interested in. Another myth is that high school is the best age to introduce amateur radio to kids. It really is not, because you got too much competition. 4th through 8th grade is a much better time to do the introduction. The next myth is you must have an outside antenna. We're going to break that myth up a little bit later and talk about software-defined radios that you can tune online and get kids listening for free without a radio, without an antenna, and being able to listen to high-quality receivers around the world. The next myth is the kids need simplified content. They don't need simplified content, but they do need content that they're capable of handling, so it depends on the age level. The next myth is that voice is the preferred mode for demos. Most students are used to talking on small devices that they can hold in their hand worldwide. Now, when I was a kid and I saw someone talking on their HT, that was wonderful. That was exciting. It isn't very exciting for kids nowadays. So I would say that voice is probably the worst mode for demos, other than the fact that they are able to do voice immediately, but we'll talk about some ways around that. The next myth is that contesting isn't for kids. Well, do you know any kids that play soccer, baseball, basketball, track, hockey, lacrosse, you name it. There's traveling sports teams and there's a high amount of competition. These kids are used to that. They also play video games where they compete. They do other things where they compete. I think contesting is great for kids and actually one of the most exciting things. The next myth is everything is surface mount, so no one builds anything anymore. That's not really true. And again, if you've never learned with anything other than surface mount, you have no problem building with surface mount components. So just as you experimented with spare resistors, capacitors, transistors, you found the same thing can happen with these kids. The next myth is CW is dead. CW is actually very active now that it is not required. Many people are taking it up because they're interested in it. And there's two groups, the CW Ops group and the Long Island CW group, that have proved that CW is very much alive. The next myth is that money and grants are available so you can fund all this stuff with kids. Well, you might be able to do that, but it's not as easy as you think. Also, some people think XYZ company will obviously donate the money for school radio clubs. Don't be so sure of that. So where do you connect to youth? Well, we've been talking about schools a lot. We also talked a little bit about scouting, but there are other youth groups out there. There's also community organizations. Your local library may run programs for youth. There may be boys and girls clubs, other things that are in your area. So you want to tap into all of those, not just schools. Quite often, it's directly. These are the friends and family. These are the students that are your friends and family's children. Social media. If your club does social media, and are you lucky enough to have a youngster in the group, have them do some social media for you. And that is a great way to reach out. Radio club recruitment, it's tough. It's very, very tough. Professional organizations, this is where you start going for those 26-year-olds who are in engineering, in computers, in other technology fields. Field Day is a great way to expose the community, to expose youth. It's a great recruiting tool we have if you can use it wisely. So let's talk about getting your foot in the door. One of the first problems with getting your foot in the door, which I'll abbreviate from here on as GYFID, in schools, homeschoolers, youth, scouting, and community organizations. How do you do that? First of all, you need to present a professional appearance in dress, actions, and preparation, etc. In other words, don't dress for a ham fest when you're going recruiting. When you go to talk to the local school, make sure you're professional. You also have to recognize that not everyone in your club is a good candidate for youth outreach or working with schools. So sometimes you might have to say to the person who always teaches the novice class, maybe we'll work with a couple other people in the club on this youth project. Don't just assume that existing club education programming licensed instructors are the best fit for youth outreach. They may be great at teaching adults, but they may not have the patience or the skill to enthusiastically teach youth. You might possibly want to set up a formal club youth committee with people that are interested and have the ability to do this, selecting one member or a group of members that are best suited for the task. You may only get one chance with a school, so you don't want to blow that chance. You may also see your section on youth. Also see the section on youth protection later in this slideshow. I'm not sure why I said earlier. I'm sorry, but I will talk about that later. Approach schools with what can we do as hams to support activities the school is already involved in. Not, look at all the great things we can do. Why aren't you doing this? You did this before. Why aren't you doing it now? You had a radio club when I was here as a student. Why isn't there a radio club now? These confrontational things will get you nowhere except for a door slammed on your foot, and you will not get a foot in the door. So again, go there humbly and go there with, how can we help you? We're here to work with you. One approach to this is to piggyback on the current high interest in STEM or STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, and the DIY, do-it-yourself movement in education. Many of your local school districts, public libraries, and scouting groups are looking for STEM activities, programs for their students, for their members, etc. So I put together a little flyer that you can use, and you can design something like this. You can steal my copy. You can edit it. Again, anytime you see this type of font or this little symbol, that means it's a link you can click on, and that'll take you out to the resource. So in this case, it's a Google document. You can make a copy and edit it for your particular group with your resources in here and your information. But this talks about amateur radio as the original maker movement. There's also some flyers from the ARRL, the DIY magic of amateur radio, and 22 things you can do with amateur radio. Do your homework. Have basic information on the K-12 instruction and curriculum in your target school and for the target grades you're looking at. Discover the key person or persons to contact at the school. This is probably one of the most important things you can do. It's not the same person at every school. It might be the principal. It might be a guidance counselor. It might be the shop teacher. It might be a science teacher. It might be the gym teacher. It might be the custodian. I worked with one school, and our way in the door was the custodian opened the door and let us get in the foot in the door, and that local club was able to take off and work with that school because the custodian happened to be a ham who was well respected in his school district. So you need to try and identify that person. If you're lucky enough to find a licensed amateur in the school, that might be a great place to start looking. Have a flexible plan to present. In other words, don't say this is what we're going to do. Say these are some of the things we could do, but we want to work with you. Possibly focus on how you can contribute to current instruction with fun real world lessons and projects. A willingness to develop long-term relationship with the school and teachers, not just a one-time event. Have some possible sample lessons that show them how you integrate what they're teaching with amateur radio and radio in general. And let me stress that again. I think we need to stress the fact of radio technology, not just amateur radio. Again, remember, we're looking for exposure here. Lifetime learning and wide educational professional backgrounds of hams that would be involved. So say we can bring an engineer, we can bring a software design coder, we can bring in a person who has done metalwork. We can bring all these people because they're members of our particular group of amateur radio operators. Some other possibilities to focus on: amateur radio as a gateway to high-tech jobs, opportunities to network with a variety of local high school tech workers, of high-tech workers, not high school, high-tech workers. And I have a whole thing here on bringing the world into your classroom that you can read up. It's a blog from discovery.com. You may also want to use some slides from the slideshow educators on amateur radio in the classroom. This is similar to what I'm talking about tonight, but this one is designed for a presentation designed to give to educators. And I've given this at a number of technology conferences before, and it talks about how they can, how you can work with them. Some possibilities to focus on: how can you contribute to current instruction with, let's see, I already had that. Willingness to develop long-term relationships, amateur radio as a gateway to tech jobs. One area you might want to focus on is space and satellites. It's a high-tech STEM area. It's interesting, and there's a lot of ties into amateur radio, including youth being able to operate satellites. Some sample lessons are always helpful, and I have a number of lessons, including math lessons that use inverse proportional fractions to calculate wavelength and frequency, lessons on metric prefixes such as kilo, mega, etc., that we use all the time in amateur radio. For science, the electromagnetic spectrum, atmospheric layers, sunspot cycle, radio propagation, space satellites, orbiting and tracking, and Doppler shift. Social studies, polar and other map projections, countries and cultures, governments and international regulations, historical relationships between countries, commonwealths, etc. I remember doing a lesson, and I had a bunch of QSL cards, and I showed 6 different QSL cards that all began with the letter V, and I asked the kids what was in common with all these countries. Only one kid in the group figured out they were all Commonwealth countries, and they all had the letter V in their call signs because they were all part of the British Commonwealth. So other examples: language arts, the phonetic alphabet, Q codes and abbreviations as methods of communication, Then broadcast radio and speech, radio drama, script writing, music, Morse code with drums, frequency and pitch, Doppler shift, data rates, compression, and digital audio processing, depending on grade level you're working with. Physical education, demonstration of wavelength and frequency with jump ropes. World languages, foreign languages, universal communication across languages, role of world cultures in radio, listening to native speakers via radio broadcast. Technology, microprocessors, programming, wireless networks, remote sensors, electricity and electronics are all examples of areas where you can develop lessons. Another way to get your foot in the door is to work with homeschoolers. Homeschoolers are often looking for free curriculum and resources and instruction. They're often in need of science and math materials, projects, etc. Amateur radio as a gateway to high-tech jobs can be very attractive, and I have here an amateur radio FAQ for parents that was put together, and it is not there. I'm going to have to fix that link. I will do that. Getting your foot in the door in scouting, local scouting events and activities, camporees, merit badge classes, some resources here. I have a resource that I put together on amateur radio and scouting, and also amateur radio resources for adults. Jamboree on the Air in October of every year. Again, if you want to do this, make sure it's part of a large program where you're not just doing the Jamboree on the Air. You provide them with resources, you provide them with information. We always try and align this up with our classes that start very soon after that. So our technician level classes start the next couple weeks after Jamboree on the Air typically. Merit badge counseling, there's a number of merit badges available, Girl Scout patches available. There's local camporees and summer camps that are looking for amateur radio demonstrations. They're not looking for amateur radio, they're looking for technology demonstrations. So we're going to rephrase it as radio technology. There's a link here for information on troop programs using radio. These are some of the merit badges that are directly related to radio. And then there's some that are ancillary related to amateur radio. So I can count 8 merit badges here that have an element in which amateur radio can contribute. There's also a Morse code interpreter strip that they can earn. And then there's also some of the requirements that can use radio as part of the rank advancements. There's also a new program. Not all scouting districts have this, but many do. It's called the STEM Nova Awards, and it's available for Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and Venture and Sea Scouters. And there's a number of requirements, many of which are radio or electronics related. I have a number of other resources here you're welcome to use. Another place to get your foot into the door is, another method to get your foot in the door is buying into the whole idea of youth protection. Youth protection is very necessary, and if you want to work with any of these groups, you're going to need to consider that in your process. It's an issue that needs to be addressed by all hams working with any youth group. Check with your local schools or other groups for additional requirements. They may require a youth protection program be taken by anyone who's going to be coming to the school. And in some cases, if you're going to be working with a school on a regular basis, they may require a BCI or FBI background exam. So just be aware of that. It's not that they're picking on you. They require this of anyone coming in and working in their school with the students. Always follow the guidelines of providing youth activities at your club or even home events. The BSA has many requirements, as do most public schools and other groups. The Boy Scouts also offer a free program that you can take online. It's a Scouting Youth Protection Program. You do need to sign up, but then you can go through and take the whole thing, and it'll generate a certificate when you're done that you can share with groups that you're working with. If you want to go other routes, there's a number of other organizations that have youth protection training programs and/or resources available. Don't forget this. This is a very, very important portion of the process. What we're going to talk about next are some examples of demonstrations for youth. And I keep talking about the word radio day before. This is something I designed for 5th to 8th grade students. and I'll talk more about that in detail, but you can also do demonstrations of scouting events, community events, ARRL Field Day, county fairs, other community events. These are all places where you can put out material for the public and for youth. The radio day is an all-day event where I go in, or a number of hams go in, and we work with all the students in that particular class, grade level, with the teachers, depending on how much the teachers want to get involved in the instruction. And I have a whole agenda available. So this is the link to that. This is the handout that we give to the students. We're going to do a Morse code activity with them. We're going to do a phonetic alphabet activity with them. So we hand all this material out to them, a little block diagram of how radio works, information on radio frequencies, what's on what frequencies, prefixes for different kilo, mega, giga, etc. Little diagram of how wavelength works, how formulas, the difference between frequency and wavelength, some charts for amateur radio frequencies, some links with comic books, Radio Zone, etc. Now, we give this to the teachers and we let them distribute in whichever fashion they'd like. Usually they distribute electronically to the students. In addition to that, I also have an agenda for the teachers. That link didn't work. Why didn't that link work? Let's try right here. This is the information that I provide ahead of time, and then we work with the teachers to decide on what we're going to be teaching, what we're going to be demonstrating, what the whole day's agenda is going to look like. And as you can see, we need to go through, this is equipment, this is other things we have, topics we're going to cover, content areas, possible topics for each of the classes, language arts, music, art, world languages, phys ed, tech, etc. And then we also have a longer list of lessons that they might be interested in. So this is all information we'd work with the school and the individual teachers ahead of time to get set up. These are just links to the same things I just showed you before. I also put together a slideshow, and we use the slideshow as a way to start out, and I customize the slideshow for the particular school. So I have this set up so you can go in and convert it for the particular school you're going to work with. And I'm not going to go through the whole slideshow, but the whole idea behind it is radio is dead. No one uses that anymore. And we disprove that by going through and showing them that what they think of as radio in many cases is something like this. But what we're really talking about are things like this, etc. And then to go through as we talk about what amateur radio is and other things, and we share this with them. So we cover the topics. We do an introduction to amateur radio talk, which I just showed the slideshow. Then we do hands-on activities. This includes demonstrations of a radio setup, hopefully making some contacts. But in addition, it also includes possibly making clothespin keys or using keys to be able to send Morse code back and forth, using online software-defined radios that they can tune themselves, and other demonstrations like maybe with a jump rope showing how wavelength and frequency function. Provide the materials to the youth and teacher leaders before the event. I always make sure that all my teachers have the materials long before we get there and let them distribute them to the students so there's no surprises and everything is ready to go. And I have a number of different handouts here, which I'll go through a little bit later. I keep talking about software-defined radios. It's a great way to hand a radio to a kid. I have a 4-page handout that goes along with this, and I clicked on the wrong one, or the link is wrong. Let me see, that link is wrong. I'll fix that link. Let me go to the link. So this handout is designed to work with the students because many times when I'm working with 75 students and when I'm working with one group on maybe doing a radio demonstration, I want the kids to be able to do something else. So these software-defined radios are a great way for the kids to be able to work on their own. There's computers available in almost every classroom you're going to be working with. They could do it on tablets. They could do it on phones. And I have a sample of here how it works, the commands they use, also for the Kiwi radios, And then I also have information on shortwave listening, band charts, frequencies, even clusters, DX clusters, so they can find stations to try and tune in. This is a great way they can go to the DX cluster, see what frequency the station's on, and try and tune it in. By the way, that whole word of tune, that word is just totally foreign to these kids. They're not used to tuning a radio like we are. They're not used to tuning a radio at all. When they listen to music, it's usually a playlist or Spotify or something along those lines. So you'll be surprised. I always make sure I include things like broadcast radio. The Radio Garden is broadcast radio stations around the world, so not just hams. And the fact that they get to tune things in can be really exciting for them. And I'll fix that link. What we're going to need to do now is we're going to need to stop at this point in time so we can do Q&A, and then we'll continue from this point. I want to cover one more topic real quicker, so I'm going to jump ahead for a few slides, and I'll come to these rest of this. But just a little bit about how I provide materials and resources. When I'm sharing resources with attendees, whether it's kids in school or people visiting us at field day, we never use paper. We print out things, we laminate them, but then we have ways for them to use QR codes or shortened URLs so that it's cheaper, it's more likely to get home, it's very easy to update even after the event, you never run out of copies, and one of the neat things is you can monitor the usage and viewing stats for that document that you shared with them. By using QR codes printed on the materials, they can just use their phone and shoot it. When I'm working with schools, we provide the links to teachers, share them with their students via their learning system, whether it's Google Classroom, whatever they use. We provide an email for Q&A follow-up with our club address. For schools, I send the materials ahead of time. I use URL shorteners so I can do things like that tiny.cc/freerx, so I can remember what the shortcut is and I can tell someone how to get to those software-defined radios. It also means that you can update the materials even after you hand them out. So if you made a mistake, you can go back and fix it, but they still have the link, and the link still goes to that updated document. There is a warning. Some schools and businesses block shortened URLs. So if you run into that problem, you may need to provide the full URLs. I use tiny.cc. You can go there and find out more about it. It's free. This is an example of a handout we might use for field day. This is laminated sitting on the table. You can shoot this QR code or type in this tiny shortcut, and that'll give you the whole document. Or you can shoot the barcode or use the shortcut to go to each of these different resources. For slideshows for presentations, a well-designed slideshow can be a great accompaniment for group presentations. Targeted to your specific audience, avoid ham jargon, make the slideshow available to the audience after the presentation. Just like I'm doing with you tonight, I make sure the slideshow is available by using shortened URLs and QR codes. If you're going to have slideshows at display tables where people are watching them without you talking to them, do a pre-recorded presentation, then you can just play that on a loop. Instead of having to have the slideshow go through on a loop, you can have voiceover, you can have videos playing in it also. So create a recorded loop that you can just play. It's great to catch passerby's eyes, and it also provides material. If I'm sitting at a table and I have one or two people behind the table working with me, and we have 10 possible guests, I can't talk to each one individually, but if I have the slideshow playing, they can watch it and get information. What I want to do is I want them to take that slideshow home with them. So every once in a while, every few slides, I embed a take-home slide. In other words, a QR code they can shoot with their phone, or they can type in the shortened URL, and this allows them to take the slideshow home with them. Exceptions to the physical handouts. There's one piece of paper I will distribute, and that are business cards with contact information and links, access to the website and materials. Even these, they'll have a QR code on them because many people will lose that card. They'd rather shoot the QR code. Some other exceptions, make it take it activities. If you're going to do things like make the clothespin keys or cheap solder kits to hand out, those are something that people will take home. The other thing is you might want to do the same thing that a lot of people do at trade shows and other public events, is have logoed trinkets that they can take home with them. coffee cups, mugs, rulers, pens, etc. But always make sure you include a web link and or QR code so they can get to the resources that you want them to actually get to. So that's where we're going to stop for today, and we'll come back and we'll talk about demonstrations in the classroom. We're going to talk about all different varieties of things with different methods. So what I want to do now is stop, but before I do that, I want to just make sure I get to the slide with the link on it so you can get the slideshow if you want it tonight. Let me go to the first one, that's better.
You want to put that in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put this up, but I'll put in the chat also. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take questions and answers.
Wait, let's Barry, go ahead, go in.
Yeah, but we're going to go through the chat first here.
Yeah, I've been monitoring it. The first question was in that picture that you had. Which one was you?
Which one was me? I wasn't in that picture.
Oh, okay. No, not that one. The one in the kids.
Yeah, I wasn't in that picture. That's just a picture I found somewhere. That wasn't me.
Okay. Let's see. And the biggest, Tammy says, when you ask the question about the excuses, I have a cell phone. That's probably a very common excuse why they don't. But with that, you need to explain to them that a cell phone is actually a radio.
Yes, that's true.
A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that.
Oh, by the way, if everyone could turn your cameras on, please.
They were trying to ban amateur, and I had to explain to them, well, they decided not to just ban amateur radio, they wanted to ban all radio. So I said, well, how many people here have cell phones? And they all said, oh, we do. Do you realize, how do you think that works? It works on radio. So if you're going to ban radios, you have to take the cell phones out of people's hands. And they said, oh, no, we don't want to do that. So they dropped it. So yeah, you got to explain, and even kids, they don't understand that a cell phone is a radio. And then the other one was FaceTime or Facebook is too easy to connect to people. Doing it by ham radio was too difficult.
Mark says it's not able to get into schools, and that is difficult. So again, we're going to talk more about some things that you can use to maybe get into schools, but I cannot guarantee it. It depends. There's a lot of factors involved. And we just went through a period of time where it was impossible for almost everyone with the pandemic.
Well, down in Parkland, because of the pandemic, getting to the school from Florida is absolutely impossible.
Yes.
You got to deal with that.
If you're not talking, if you could make sure you're muted, we're getting a little bit of feedback through someone there. Thank you.
And then there were the people, no lids, no kids, no space cadets. I remember those people on 75-meter home.
Yeah, I remember them too.
Yep.
So this is where, when you're working with kids, you have to be helpful and guide them in the right direction so that they don't get into those situations.
Yep. And a lot of the schools have removed shop classes and electronics classes out of the schools. And the maker movement isn't doing that well. But that's one way to go, to look and see, join up with the makers. Because the makers do some fantastic things when they're active. And we need some more electronic project kits. Yes, I agree.
Drew, can you expand a little bit on the comment you left in there about the ARRL has a serviceable curriculum?
Sure. So, I mean, if you go to the ARRL's website, you can find the curriculum that's listed there. And it does work as far as a good starting point for teachers in a variety of different subject areas to be able to use, manipulate, adapt from, depending on wherever they're particularly starting. It's not meant to be an entire class or course on its own, but it's a series of self-contained, sustainable lessons, units, if you will. And the ARRL does an excellent job as far as assisting in the implementation of those. Reaching out to Steve Goodgame at the ARRL, I mean, he is incredibly responsive, very willing to help, and he has a whole bunch of, teacher mentors, teacher facilitators that help to do trainings for them that are wonderful in terms
Yeah, and
of
I want to do a
helping to.
segue. Yeah, and thank you very much. And I wanted to do a segue from that too. I'm going to be those materials, the links to those are all coming up in the next half of the slides. But I also just want to give you, I know it's a little bit early, but there's going to be another Teacher Institute class in October. So I just want to mention that now. I'll have more details on that next week. But if you're really interested and you're thinking about that, take a look at the ARRL site now so you can plan ahead for that. So thank you. We will be getting to all those, and that is very true. Thank you, Drew. Gone are the days of Radio Shack. Yeah.
Yeah. I posted a link. It's a very good link done by NASA on the electromagnetic spectrum in everyday life. And I've used that when I've gone before county commissions and other groups who are trying to understand that ham radio is not a threat. We live in an electromagnetic world, and microwaves and TV and radio and all kinds of things do electromagnetic waves. It's not just ham radio antennas that are bad. So it's a really good thing if you want to check that out. Tammy wants to know phonetic alphabet. I posted a link to the NATO phonetic alphabet.
Yeah, I think Tammy's asking about the activity though that we do. So let me talk a little bit about that. We do two different activities, Tammy. We have an activity we do with school students, but there's also an activity we do in our amateur radio, our student clubs. We do what's called a eyeball QSO contest, and each person, and I'll have details with a link next time on this, but each person gets a QSL card randomly pulled out of a deck, and that's the call sign they have to use, and they have to use it phonetically. And they get 15 minutes to try and make as many contacts with other students in the classroom, but they have to basically scream and yell with the phonetic alphabet so that they can write down so it's basically like trying to make contacts in a polyp on the air, but you're using the phonetic alphabet and you're using a call sign, but you're not using a radio. And I'll talk a lot more about that next time. Also, I have details in the slideshow on the eyeball QSO contest.
Classroom management tips.
Yes, we'll be talking about classroom management also next time. Okay, so let's go ahead and get some of the hands. I see we have some hands up.
We do. Gene, go ahead and take it.
Hey, everybody, this is Gene from glorious Killeen, Texas. This is the question I have concerning basically selling your credentials to a school board, a school committee. Here in Texas, we have, for the most part, independent school districts. It's not funded by the city. It's got its own funding, its own rules. The city can't tell them what to do, can't tell them what to do or not to do. What would you say is if I had an appointment with a member of this school district or the whole body of the school district, what would be, in your opinion, the bare minimum of written credentials besides perhaps a copy of my FCC license that I present to them at the very beginning before they start asking for other requirements?
Well, I would say that there's really not a credential thing as much as explaining to them that you will follow through with all the youth protection requirements they have. You could do that ahead of time with the Boy Scout program. That's a good thing to be able to have right then to show them that you're serious about that. The other big thing too is to explain to them that you are there to work with them, not to do something for them specifically. So the credentials I don't think are as important as the mood you set for the discussion. I think is more important than the credentials. But do be aware, by some of the things we talked about today, be aware of the fact that acknowledge up front, we understand that there's some things we need to do for youth protection. We're willing to do whatever the school requires. We've already gotten our Boy Scout youth protection certification for our people that work with us, but we'd be happy to do anything else the school requires.
All right, thank you very much. I'm writing notes, as you say.
Okay, very good. Richard?
Hi, good evening. It's a great presentation. Actually, I just have a simple request. Can you put that slide back up with the barcode on it?
Yes.
So I can take a shot of that real quick. I'm on my iPad here, and
Yes, I'll be happy to. So just give me 1 second.
sure.
While I'm doing that, I want to point out one of the members of the audience here. That's Katie Campbell, Kilo 8 LQR. She's waving. She is are you a junior this year or you're a sophomore?
Yeah, I'm a sophomore this year.
She's a sophomore here in Ohio at Columbiana schools. And she is my assistant state section youth coordinator. Let me bring the slide up for you. I went by it. How did I go by it twice? There we go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other hands, Scott, go ahead.
You know, and I think one credential would be helpful is having a basic understanding of instruction. You know, like when I teach in the fire service, I have to have instructor 1A, 1B, understanding how their curriculums are put together and having some basic instructional training, I think is a very good qualification to be able to present to a school board or to any group that you want to teach for, that you understand the dynamics of adult learning, child learning, and the interaction of those, because they're vastly different.
And that's a great point, Scott. And some of you might be asking right now, well, how do I figure that out? Here's where you go out. And if you don't have someone that's an educator in your club, then go to the next step. Find out whether any of your club members' spouses are educators or one of their family members are educators, and ask them to work with you on the process. It is invaluable to have someone that understands curriculum and instruction working with the group as you're planning all these things. They don't even need to know anything about radio. You'll provide that end, but they can provide the help with you for the other end of things. So having someone work with your group who understands curriculum and instruction. And if you don't know what those things are, don't worry. You can find someone that can help you with those things. And that is invaluable to be able to go in and understand that they're going to be looking for various things when you're talking to them. And if you know the language, it can be very helpful. I was lucky enough to work for a school district for over 25 years, not as a teacher, but working in technology, but also working in curriculum and instruction. So I understood those things, and it was fairly easy for me to discuss them. So if you can put someone like that on your team, that can be invaluable. So thank you, Scott.
Yeah, and this last point, like I said, is we as adults learn differently than we do kids. And if we try to instruct kids the same way we instruct adults, you've lost, you're done. It's a losing battle almost, and vice versa. If you try to instruct adults as we instruct kids, they're gone.
Yeah, and that's why I said that maybe that group that does your licensing classes every year might not be the best group to have running this project. Other questions, comments, suggestions, tips?
You give highlights of what we're going to do tomorrow or next week?
Oh, next week we're going to continue. We're going to do talk about actual demos you can do, different activities you can do. We're going to talk about whenever you're doing a radio demonstration, what mode should you choose? And depending on which mode you choose, how the best way to make that effective for the audience you're working with. So we'll be talking about a lot of those things. We'll also talk more about what's involved in licensing, what's involved in starting a club. There's a lot of material. So your homework for next time is go ahead and go through the handout ahead of time. All the slides are there. I do warn you though, I will add more slides and tweak them before next week. So Jeff first.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Just one other comment about going into the schools. I would also maybe suggest working ahead of time with the teacher. That's going to be the teaching expert there. So if you have access to the teacher, just they can bring you in and you can be the guide, and they would be the in control of the classroom, I would think, so just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And it really, when I work with them, I ask them up front, how much do you want to be involved in instruction? and how much do you want me to be involved in? I've had teachers say, I'd love to do all the instruction, but I don't know the material. Will you go over the material ahead of time with me? So I've done that. And then I've had other teachers that say, I'll do the classroom management, you do the actual instruction because I don't feel comfortable with it. So be flexible in that. But again, working with them ahead of time is very important. Just showing up on that day. There's one thing you should avoid, and that's just not preparing ahead of time and not planning for resources afterward. So make sure you're doing both of those. The day you're there is a single day in time, but the kids you're really going to impress and the things that are really going to work out well is that pre-planning with the teacher and then the resources that you provide with them to follow up. I've had students before, I've been there one day, they've seen me, but I've left materials and I've seen these kids show up 2 years later at a VE session. And they had the links and all the things, and they found a local resource that they worked with, and they got their license. So all I was there is for one day, but I left them the resources to continue and who to go to next. So we're going to be discussing that a lot more next time, because that's one of the big things is once you do have those kids who do decide they want to go further, make sure they have the materials. So I think, Richard, you're next.
One thing to suggest is that we had some real good success. We've been in with a STEAM group the last couple of years. The first time they have like an annual a show, so to speak, and they bring everything in. We had a very modest presentation the first year. They were so impressed with us that last year they gave us about 30 feet of space right off the front of everything. And it's been a great way to make contact. And out of that, we can start building with credibility to some of the other schools. And it seems to be an easier than average approach because we fit into a program they've got in existence.
Yeah. And again, if you can add to what they're doing as opposed to substituting for what they're doing, that's always a key to success. Scott, again.
Yeah, Anthony, I think you hit the nail on the head just a minute ago. How they remember you. And I'll give you a good example. I teach a lot of fire prevention to elementary schools, and I did a presentation to a class, and it was probably 6 months, 8 months later. I was at a structure fire, and this little kid walked up to me, and she goes, "I remember you from my classroom. You taught me on fire prevention." And I think you hit the nail on the head. You have to leave them with that impression, and if you do that, you've captured them. And that's extremely important with anybody of youth, is you have to leave them with something.
Good, Scott.
Do you want to have Danielle give his funny story on how his son learned the phonetic alphabet?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Go ahead, Dan. Danielle. I forgot we've added an L to your name now.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So my son, he joined the Army, and he knew that he needed to learn the phonetic alphabet. And so what I would do with him is we'd go jogging together, and I would call out a random letter, and he would have to tell me the phonetic equivalent. And if he got it wrong, in the shoulder. It took him about one day to realize that that was not a good idea not to know the phonetic alphabet. So the next day we'd go through, and as time went on, there was a lot less hits in the shoulder. And that was more of a just a cool thing to do with your son before he gets deployed. And he learned the alphabet as well. And, now, just for grins and giggles, he's long since retired from the Army. I'll go ahead and still test him on it. And he knows what'll happen if he gets it wrong. So fun stuff.
And Tammy has her hand up in the chat. So
Yeah, go ahead, Tammy.
Okay, I'm hoping to get some more ideas. I tried working with 4-H with homeschooling this last year, to get something taught, and I think I just went over their heads and everybody eventually dropped out. But I do homeschooling, and my you were saying that the number 4, the best way to get people interested, to get kids.
Hello, I am her child and I have a radio license.
Yep. So
Well, I
that's my
agree. And
12-year-old licensed at 10 years old.
well, that's great, Tammy. And Tammy brings up another thing too. There are groups that we sometimes forget about. 4-H is another one. So, depending on what's active in your area, you may have Future Farmers America, may have 4-H, you may have other groups too. So again, Tammy, one of the things is, if you felt like it went sort of over their head, go back and take a look at what you did and think about how you're going to plan it next time and try it out again. That's one of the things that really happens. I mean, a lot of this is being flexible. And what I do quite often when I'm working in a school is I go in with one plan, but I have 2 plans in my back pocket, one in each back pocket. I have my plan B and my plan C. And that's why I ask you to turn on your cameras tonight, because I look at the faces of the students, and if things are not going well with plan A, I might pull plan B or plan C out of my back pocket and completely shift gears. So being able to judge your audience on the fly and having backup plans can be very, very helpful for success. So sometimes if you go in with too simple of a plan, it doesn't make the impression you want. Sometimes if you go in with too complex of a plan, it goes over their head. So have multiple plans in your pocket and then try and judge your audience as you're going along. So I think that's very important. I'm going to put Katie on the spot here and ask her to tell us a little bit about her experience, because Katie started quite young at her school, and they were lucky because they did have a ham who was not on staff, but he was the resource officer, the police officer assigned to their building. And one day he saw a physics class talking about different wavelengths of light, and he had experience in forensic labs, so he showed them some of these forensic lighting patterns, and that was his starting to get involved in the curriculum area. But then that actually spread into the amateur radio area also. But I'll let Katie talk a little bit about her experience in getting involved as a youth.
Yeah, just like Anthony was saying earlier, our school resource officer actually kind of like partnered up with the 7th and 8th grade science teacher in the middle school. So he had like a place, like a room where we could meet. And then he also had someone who was very experienced with delivering curriculum and stuff. So that was a really good situation there. In terms of getting involved as a young person, it's really, really hard, like when you're starting out, if you don't have a whole bunch of resources. So some clubs that are like specifically tailored to youth do a really good job of like, once you get your license, okay, here's this resource, like here's a youth group you can join that's over the internet. Here's a youth group that has a net on Echolink. And some clubs aren't as experienced with that kind of thing. So it's really good to familiarize yourself with resources for youth. So once they start getting licensed, you can point them in other directions. A lot of times finding like a youth group like YOTA, which is Youth on the Air, or YACHT, which is Young Amateur Communication Ham Team, is a really good way to kind of keep the kids interested, because they focus more on retention than getting licensed. That's been one of the big things with our club, is once we get kids licensed, actually retaining them and keeping them interested is more of a struggle, just because our club is so focused on, okay, here's how you get your license, like this is what you need to do to prepare for the exam and everything like that. So definitely have like resources that you can point them towards for retention, because it's really hard, like as a young person, to know where to go once you get your license. Like obviously you know a little bit about things after the test, but usually you don't know, like, do I want to do CW? Do I want to do POTA, SOTA? Do I want to do digital modes? Like, you don't know all of your options. So finding other resources and being able to point them in other directions is really, really helpful. Some of the biggest things that I've been able to do have, like in ham radio, they've been like a result of me being able to get involved with groups like Yoda and Yacht. So definitely have resources that you can point them towards. And yeah, retention is definitely one of the bigger issues. Like even out of schools, like college age, a lot of kids I see like get their licenses and are super into it for about a month, and then after that they're like, "Oh, I have a ham radio license? Like, I forgot about that." So definitely try and keep the kids interested and engaged as best you can. Does anybody have any questions for me?
How old were you when you got your license?
When I got my technician, I was 10 years old.
Wow.
Katie not only has gotten her license, but Katie's also involved in instruction and getting other students on the air. She's also an instructor for the Long Island CW group. She's a budding contester, and
she makes her bed.
Now, Katie just really hit the nail on the head there with something that's hard for us to remember as adults. We need to be providing pathways and activities where youth can meet up with other youth. That's really important. And Katie, are you still running the net, or are you involved in the Ohio? There's an Ohio net that meets on a local repeater, but they also do it via Echolink, so it's available for anyone to check in from anywhere. And we'll have that information next time on the youth net. But it's in Ohio, but it's available anywhere. So, and hopefully, Katie, you can join us again next week, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
We have
Another topic the kids are interested in is robotics and using ham radio, because we can use higher power to control robotic devices, like in robotic competitions, and also doing rocket launches and satellite communications. My nephew got his ham radio license at the University of Michigan, so he could do telemetry with a satellite that they were building and going to have NASA launch. So that's another way to get people, with a career involved in ham radio.
Yeah, something that we see, especially like at the collegiate levels. I just got the opportunity to meet with the president of the Case Western Reserve Amateur Radio Club, and he mentioned that a lot of times, like when they have people joining the club, it's because of, oh, this directly correlates with my major, and I want somewhere to be able to apply what I'm learning. So a lot of, especially at the collegiate level, a lot of kids are getting into it because of career paths and not the other way around. And yeah, Jim just mentioned in the chat, tracking weather balloons is a really good way to get kids interested. I have had the opportunity to attend the past 2 Yoda camps, so the one in Canada this past year and then Ohio the year before. And the weather balloons or the high altitude balloon launches that we do are always a super big hit. It's a lot of people's favorite part of the week.
As long as they don't get shot down.
Yeah. Looks like Jeff has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, for sharing. And my kids got their licenses at 11 and 12 about 9 years ago or so. And they're not that active on amateur bands, but we have a Tuesday night GMRS net, and we do a neighborhood radio watch. So, Anthony, when you were saying radios generally, not just specifically ham, I think that there's opportunity to get young people involved through FRS and then GMRS and then ham. We've had several people use that as sort of a gateway into amateur radio. And it's also a safety issue in our area. We have wildfire evacuations that we need to worry about. And so the neighborhood radio watch has been growing pretty quickly, and our ham club is now actively trying to figure out exactly how that dovetails with the amateur stuff that we already do. So, but I did have one last question for you, Katie. What did you do right after you got your license? What was the first thing you did in ham radio?
So right after I got my license, I had a really good situation have. It's not past tense. A lot of my family is licensed and my grandpa's licensed. My mom had actually gotten her technician when she was in middle school. And so after I got my tech, she was like, "Oh, like this could be a family activity." So we actually studied for our generals together and passed that at Hambention. So I kind of, after I got my license, I wasn't super interested in like just the repeater stuff. I mean, I did spend a lot of time on our local repeater. Um, so I had lots of fun there, but I really wanted to get my general and extra just so I could have HF privileges. So probably for the first couple months anyway, I was very much I was on the repeaters a lot. But then as soon as I had HF privileges and the setup, I was just on HF working DX as much as possible.
Now, Katie sent me a movie a couple of years ago of her mentoring her younger sister on getting on HF. I think the thing, Katie, I think is really interesting from what you just said was the very first activity she actually did was mentor someone else as soon as she got her license, which I think is just an absolute great thing to have someone that does that. I wanted to mention one thing, Jeff. One of the things that we do with FRS, Family Radio Service, is when we have students that aren't licensed already, we do some activities using FRS type things also. We've done a little contest within the building where they went to different floors, like they were different countries and different rooms. And every time they changed, they could make another contact. The other thing too, that they really enjoyed doing, and this didn't involve any licensing, was fox hunting. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next time. So I don't want to go too long here because we've already went a little bit long, but we'll be back next week. I'm glad we made this into 2 weeks because it definitely has enough material for 2 weeks. So we'll be seeing you all next week. Tell your friends. And by the way, I need to know what Hannah's call is because Hannah, your call shows up as N3D ... You got to get Drew to let you have a little more space on the screen there.
Don't forget Lou, he's got his hand up.
Okay, I didn't. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lou.
Okay, let's see if I'm unmuted. Okay. Hearing some of these things reminded me of a situation I had in 2006, actually. I was doing a presentation along with a couple of other hams trying to revitalize or restart the W2CLE club in New York. And I was the first one to speak, and I asked the students who were there, how many of you use radio? And the reaction I got was a room full of blank stares. And I realized that they had no idea what radio was. And I thought for a moment, and then I asked, remember this was 2006, cell phones were not universal yet. How many use a cell phone? How many use a pager? How many, all of these categories. And now I had everyone in the room had their hands raised. And I said, every one of those devices is a radio. They had no idea. And sometimes they just don't know what radio is. And that was a critical point there. It got a lot of interest all of a sudden.
I agree. And just the whole idea, that's why I always provide other radio opportunities like the commercial radio that they can tune around the world because they've just never really had experience tuning a radio before. It's just really foreign to them. So we'll get the information on the Tammy, we'll get the information for you on checking into the youth net that's ran here in the Ohio section by Katie. And I think, is Amber still doing the other net check-ins or who's doing the other?
Bernadette and I are
Bernadette, that's it. Yes.
kind of trade off who's net control, just depending on when we're free and who has stuff we have to get done that week. So usually it's one of the two of us, and if it can't be one of us, then Tom does it.
Okay, very good. I think we have another hand up. Gene. Go ahead, Gene.
Yes, sorry for the delay there. This is for Katie. Before you got your license, did you do any tinkering with electronic components? And after you got your license, if you didn't do it before, do you find yourself doing it now or doing more so than you did before you got your license?
So my school started a club in November of 2018. Before that, I had barely done anything electronics component related. Did not know anything about them, so that's probably a large part of it. Once I joined the club, we did do a little bit, like we were learning how to use breadboards, just basic Ohm's law stuff, and then we would build simple circuits to apply what we were learning. So I did a little bit. After I got my license and became more active and involved in the ham radio community, I definitely found myself doing more with it. Mostly just kit building and that kind of thing. I'm not super likely to go out and buy a whole bunch of components and try and piece something together, but things like kit building, I definitely do more now than I would have before.
Okay, do you do develop digital modes into your radio system in your computer? And well, basically, do you incorporate that in your learning process?
So I actually have only ever done digital modes once or twice at a club station. When I'm at home just operating, my main mode is CW. I do SSB a little bit, but I have never done digital modes for my home station, so that's kind of something I need to work on.
Okay, thank you very much for your input.
You just made a lot of old timers very happy that with those last statements there. Okay, we're running really long on this. Do we have any more questions? We need to start closing this up. Anybody else got anything out there? Barry, how we doing that?
Yeah, looks like we're good.
Okay.
Everyone come back next week, bring a friend. Take a look at the you get a chance that you can cheat. You can go ahead and look at the rest of the slideshow presentation. You anticipate what I'm going to say, and you'll see that there's a bunch of slides. We may not even finish all those, but we will go through as much as we can, and you guys can read some on your own. And hopefully this has inspired some of you to start, if you already haven't, or to maybe encourage some of you to continue doing what you're doing. And so I know a number of you are already doing these things, and I'm speaking to the choir here quite often, but hopefully we can share ideas. So bring back a friend next time, share this information, and we'll say 73. Dan, what else do you have?
That's all I have. It's been a great presentation. Thank you very much to everybody that contributed here. This has been a great one.